The scene is London in 1881, and a wounded army doctor is introduced to a stranger in a chemistry lab. The stranger glances at him for 1 second, shakes his hand, and says, "You've been in Afghanistan, I perceive." The doctor's stunned. He's never met the stranger, so how could he have possibly known that? The stranger, of course, is Sherlock Holmes, and the doctor in question is the famous Dr. Watson. Holmes later explains how he knew where Watson had been. Watson was a man with the bearing of a soldier, but the manner of a doctor. His face was tanned, but his wrists were fair, so the tanning was from the sun exposure, probably while in uniform. And side note for those of you who've never been to the United Kingdom, London is not a particularly sunny place. Watson's arm was also held kind of stiffly, which implied he might be wounded. So where might an English army doctor get sunburned and wounded in 1880? The answer was Afghanistan, during the Second Anglo-Afghan War. Holmes called this his science of deduction, but here's the really fun part. He was actually using the wrong word. Logicians have 3 names for 3 different ways of reasoning. And what Holmes does is most of the third kind. Those 3 ways of reasoning are not just trivia, they're the cleanest map I know for understanding how every good AI tool you have ever touched actually works and learns. So let's meet them with Holmes' help. So before we cover how AI works and learns, let's begin by briefly introducing the 3 kinds of reasoning. And as we cover these forms of reasoning, I want you to keep something in mind from the first video in this series. AI uses rules that it derives from humans or data to predict things. Things like where an English army doctor might get sunburned and wounded in 1880. The first type of reasoning is deduction. If you start from rules you know for certain are true, then when you apply them to a case, the conclusion is guaranteed. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, and therefore Socrates is mortal. No surprises, no risks. But there's a catch here. Deduction only works if somebody already knows for certain the rules to start with and writes them down. There are many things in life where that's very tricky, which brings us to the second type of reasoning called induction. You start from a pile of observations and you try to guess the general rule. Suppose I want to determine if a bird is a swan, as an example. Well, every swan I've ever seen has been white, so I may functionally conclude that all swans are white. That might be useful, but definitely not guaranteed to be true. I bet you somewhere out there, probably in Australia, there's a... The last type of reasoning is abduction, the Sherlock Holmes special. We start from a handful of clues and then reason our way backward to the explanation that best accounts for them. If I walk out this morning and see that my lawn is wet, there isn't a single guaranteed explanation for why. There are several possible reasons, with some being more likely and others less likely. So, for example, it could have rained, the sprinklers could have gone off, a water gun fight could have broken out, a secret government drone could have passed by and poured water on my lawn. Now, most people would probably admit that while all of those are technically possible, the sprinklers are the most likely answer, and that is what abduction is. It's the most likely answer for a set of possible reasons or causes that underlie it. It's educated guessing, not certain, but astonishingly useful. Now, I want you to think about those kinds of reasoning alongside the types of AI from Lecture 1. What is old school rules-based AI? Take a minute and think about it. It's a deduction machine. Experts wrote down thousands of those if, then, else rules that we discussed. and the computer then applies them with perfect obedience. It's transparent, it's reliable, and it's stuck. It could never handle a case its authors had not imagined. That's why the field moved away from those systems in most, but not all cases. Machine learning and deep learning systems rely on induction to learn their rules. You feed the machine a mountain of examples: spam and not spam, cat and not cat, swan and not swan, and it figures out the rules using induction, patterns no humans wrote. But when a trained system meets a brand new email or photo, its verdict is abduction, a best guess from the patterns it holds in its mind at that time. And the same is true of generative AI. When you type a prompt like write a story about a dog in space, the AI must guess the best way to finish your sentence. And to do that, it applies abduction. That's what creates the plausible response based on the rules of language it learned during its training phase, during the induction process, as it studied that data from the past. So here's the central thesis of the whole lecture. Every AI system, whether it's an old one or a new one, is a pattern recognition machine. The only question is where the patterns come from. Are they written by hand or are they learned from data? And the learning is the part that changes everything. So, how does a machine learn a pattern in the first place? Where are those patterns stored? How are they captured? The answer to those questions actually began in 1943 when a neuroscientist and a logician, an odd couple, sat down together and asked a strange question. Could a single brain cell be described as a simple mathematical object, a switch? On paper, it made sense. They could do it. A little unit that adds up incoming signals and fires if they pass a threshold. 15 years later, a Cornell psychologist named Frank Rosenblatt wired hundreds of those switches together into a machine called the perceptron. He lined them up in a single layer, all looking at the same image all at once, each one casting a vote, and gave it one ability that changed everything. When it got an answer wrong, it was able to adjust the strengths of its own connections in the direction of the right answer. The scientists were, in other words, training the machine example by example. When the team showed off the results with reporters in 1958, the New York Times told America this was the embryo of a machine that would one day walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and be conscious of its existence. But in 1969, the enthusiasm soured. Two MIT researchers published a book claiming that simple single-layer perceptrons could never learn basic patterns. And just like that, the funding evaporated, and the idea spent roughly 2 decades effectively in the scientific wilderness, kept alive by just a scattered handful of true believers. To them, the theoretical fix was always known. You just needed to add more layers. The reason that the layers matter so much is because patterns stack. The first layer can learn an edge, a color, a blob, but the next layer learns patterns made of those patterns. And the next layer after that learns patterns made of those patterns of patterns. So a deep enough stack can assemble effectively any shape or pattern out of nearly nothing. But there is a catch. A learner that's so flexible has a vice. If you show it too few examples, it will happily just learn the wrong lessons, memorizing quirks instead of truths. The only reliable cure to overcome that vice is with volume. And by volume, I'm talking about the data volume, how many examples you give it. So many varied examples that only the real pattern survives, which sets us up for a nice puzzle. The neuron idea is from 1943. The learning machine is from 1958. Why did what we think of as AI, your phone unlocking your face, etc., seem to arrive from nowhere in around 2012? Well, the reason is because the recipe was always missing two ingredients: the data and the horsepower to chew through all that data. In the mid-2000s, a young professor named Fei-Fei Li made a unfashionable bet. While nearly everyone in the field raced to invent more clever algorithms, she argued that the real bottleneck to progress was the food of the machine. That's the data. Learning machines were basically starving, and so what she did was set out to build the largest labeled photo collection ever attempted, and she called it ImageNet. Labeling millions of photos by hand would have taken her lab decades to do on its own. So instead, she enlisted the help of some 49,000 crowd workers in 167 countries, hired through an Amazon service named after the very same chess-playing machine from episode 1, the Mechanical Turk. So the hidden humans were back, but this time they were teaching the machine instead of pretending to be one. The finished collection held over 14 million photographs, sorted into more than 20,000 categories: golden retrievers, fire trucks, strawberries, and so on. And for the first time, a learning machine could sit down and enjoy a full meal. The horsepower to process that data, meanwhile, arrived from an unexpected aisle of the electronics store: graphics cards. Built so video games could paint millions of pixels all at once, turned out to be perfect for the network's millions of tiny simultaneous calculations through those little switches we spoke about earlier, the neurons. The machinery of humanity's make-believe worlds had become the training ground for the artificial ones. In 2010 and 2011, the best traditional systems in the ImageNet competition I referenced earlier misread about one image in every 4. But then in 2012, 3 researchers from Toronto entered a deep neural network they called AlexNet, trained on ImageNet using 2 gaming graphics cards, obliterating the field. Consider that result carefully, because it's the lesson of the modern AI era. The winning ideas were decades old. What changed was the meal fed to the models. 1 million training photos and chips fast enough to run the guess, check, nudge loop I referenced earlier billions upon billions of times. But I want you to notice the difference between what it took for a machine to develop skills that we take for granted in people. A 3-year-old can meet one giraffe in a picture book and recognize giraffes for their entire life, from all angles, at all various ages, with and without spots on the giraffe, and so on. AlexNet needed hundreds of examples of every single category, more than 1 million photos in total, to reach 15% error. So neural networks are not small sample learners. They are statistics engines, and statistics demand volume, lots of data. This is also where induction's fine print starts to come due. You see, a pattern squeezed from data is only going to be as broad as the data it's squeezed from. If the machine never saw a black swan, or a giraffe at night, or a face like yours. Its rule may quietly exclude them, and that's going to be important when we think about how to evaluate AI later in this series. Which brings us finally to the tools that everyone's been talking about. Chatbots, tools like ChatGPT, are the same machinery we've been discussing. The neurons, the layers, the guess, check, nudge loop, stacked extraordinarily deep and pointed at a new kind of data, in this case, human language. And they were fed the largest meal of data we have possibly ever assembled. They learned by reading us, all of us. One early system, GPT-3, trained on hundreds of billions of words, scraped from books, articles, the open internet, and so on. That's more reading than you could do in 1,000 lifetimes. During training, it had exactly one job: read a passage and guess the next word. Check, nudge, repeat. A few 100 billion times. It sounds like a parlor trick, and here's why it's not. To guess the next word, well, everywhere, the network is forced to absorb the patterns that sit underneath words. Grammar, facts, styles, the shape of an argument, the rhythm of a recipe, the cadence of a poem. Predicting language done at this scale quietly requires modeling the things language is about. So, how does AI work and learn? There are three ways we covered. There's deduction, the old rule-following machines. There's induction. Those are modern systems that are squeezing patterns out of oceans of examples by guessing, checking, and nudging. And finally, we have abduction. Every answer they hand you afterward, a best guess from the patterns learned during induction. One method at a scale no detective, not even Sherlock Holmes, could have ever dreamed of. When Holmes explained his Afghanistan trick, Watson said that the reasoning seemed absurdly simple once he described it. And Holmes agreed. Seeing the method dissolves the magic. And that is the point of this series in Align. Our next question: if these machines are pattern engines, then what are they actually good at, and where do they start to fall apart? I'll see you there.